Okay. Thank you for joining our conversation and reading today with Farah Ali and Hananah Zaheer. I'm going to introduce them before we get started talking about their books and their writing. Farah Ali is from Karachi, Pakistan. Her work won the 2020 Pushcart Prize and received special mention in the 2018 Pushcart Anthology. Her most recent stories can be found in Shenandoah, the Arkansas International, the Southern Review, and Kenyon Review Online. Her debut short story collection, People Want to Live, was published with McSweeney's in October of 2021. Hananah Zaheer, this is Farah. Hananah Zaheer is the author of Lovebirds from Bull City Press 2021. Other work has appeared in places such as Kenyon Review, Best Small Fictions 2021, Agni, Virginia Quarterly, and others. Her story Fish Tank at Alaska Quarterly was a notable mention in Best American Short Stories in 2019. She's the founder of the Dubai Literary Salon and a fiction editor at Los Angeles Review. And my name is KK Fox, and I write fiction as well. I'm here to talk with them today. I'm also a fiction editor at Los Angeles Review. So before we start talking about the books themselves, though, I wanted to kind of talk to the authors about their writing lives and how they kind of came to writing. And, you know, how did you get started writing? That can mean even like, what kind of kid were you? Were you a big reader as a kid? Were you a writer, or was it the opposite?
I think I fit very much the traditional cliche description of what kind of child grows up to become a writer. I read everything in sight, including, and I remember this vividly, the back of like shampoo bottles, and felt very greedy because I was like, I'm never going to be able to read everything in life. And so I would just read everything I could find. And then started writing. My family was a bit of like artsy, like literary family. So I started writing poetry, call it poetry, at around 4, in Urdu, actually.
Wow.
I know, shockingly.
I don't believe it.
I have it still. My uncle actually passed away, and my other uncle was writing all this like grief poems. And so I felt like, well, if you're writing a book, can I add a poem to the end of this book? And so that was sort of my first real piece of writing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my favorite room in the school would be the library. And we shifted around a couple times. So I would first make sure where the used books store was in the city, and then inside the school, the librarian and I knew each other really well. So super typical, just like Hananah said, reading everything, toothpaste, or from eating something, I'll read whatever. Everything was a story. I don't know how ingredients could be a story, but they can. And I was always making stories in my head. You actually got your stuff in your uncle's book, but I didn't. But what I did do was I constructed a book. I remember distinctly, I drew like kittens having there was a plot. Okay, all caps, and there was a drawing there, and I stapled it, and I was like so sure this is gonna be in bookstores now, but the only shelf it saw was mine. But I've always wanted to write. I've never not written.
Did you keep a diary?
Oh my God, yeah.
Did you keep a diary?
I kept a very redacted diary. So a lot of my childhood diaries have like big black, like missing bits. So it's like, oh, today was awful. Nothing.
Wait, you
nothing,
went back
nothing.
and you redacted?
I redacted stuff because I was afraid that my mom was going to read it. So now I look at it and I have no clue what happened that day, but I can tell if it was bad or good. Generally,
Right.
yeah.
I have a lot of diaries to the point where I've had friends who have said, I'm really sorry about that year, because they know that I've kept a lot. Okay, so along the lines of writing then, what was the beginnings of these books for you? These are both collections, short story collections. Did you set out to write a short story collection book, or were you organically writing stories that kind of came together as a book, or both, or neither? Is there a genesis story for your books?
I know when I wanted to write, the picture in my head was that I'll write a novel, capital N, not like a collection with a capital C. So when I finally took my writing myself and my pursuit of writing seriously, and somehow it was short fiction that I started doing, but I wasn't thinking I'm going to write a book. It was just all the stories in my head or everything that I'd been observing. It just came out like an avalanche. And it was a big self-teaching process because I don't live here and I wasn't well versed with the literary scene, like journals or whatever. But I was writing and I was submitting. And I think one day I saw something open for a competition for collections. I'm like, okay, let's see if these are enough and if they qualify. I think when I started submitting seriously and I got some response kind of in a positive tone, I was like, okay, I'm not totally, making up stuff in my head here.
Mm-hmm.
There could be something. So
and it just kind of, so when you submitted it to the contest, is that
yeah. And there was a cohesiveness in the stories already because they were all of them at least touched directly or indirectly upon Karachi, which is where I grew up. So
right.
There was that.
We may be talking about Karachi in a little bit, but
I started writing, I think short stories are a very natural form for me. I started writing them also when I was very young. I think when I was 12, 13, I just thought I was really funny. I thought in my so I was writing these really like funny short stories. And do you remember there's a magazine called Us Magazine?
Yeah, my God.
So I published in Us Magazine.
Oh,
the first time I got like 150 rupees.
This is in Pakistan?
In Pakistan, I got a check for 150 rupees and I was like, you can make money doing this. This is amazing. But of course, then it took a while after that. And so for me, I think short stories are very exciting, natural form. I do gravitate to it more. Still do, even though now I'm trying to work on novels with capital N.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that this is like a question that's hard to answer and might be impossible to answer, but do you have a favorite? You don't even have to share. You could just confess.
Mm-hmm.
You have a favorite?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share?
It's things I say to my son as he sleeps.
Well, you will be reading that today. That's perfect.
Yeah. I just, it was a challenge. I've been trying to write a single sentence story. I had been for 2 to 3 years at that point, and like a good one, just something that like had energy and that moved. And so when I finished that, it brought together a lot of things that were of concern to me, and including the form. So I was, so I kind of,
you do.
It's my little personal favorite. Yeah.
I don't have a favorite story, but I think I have characters that I liked in the book. I like the girl in Beautiful. Mm-hmm. I like the boy in Believers. And so yeah,
the boy in the accident. The boy.
Yes, with the truck.
Yeah. I once saw a conversation between Ann Patchett and Lily King talking about their her book Five Tuesdays in Winter. I can't remember the name, but it's 5 Tuesdays. And she admitted, but she wouldn't confess, that she had a least favorite.
Oh.
And I thought it was correct to not confess it, but then I felt like I went home trying to look for it. Do you guys have a least favorite? Does that even happen?
Well,
yeah.
I think there is one that I'm thinking of, which I also will not confess which is my least favorite, but in the sense of that is a character that I don't like. And I worked very hard on that story, and it's still I wasn't able to connect to that character in the way that I wanted to. And so I think it's one of those that when I was done, I was kind of happy to put it away, which I think is a good sign that that's not a favorite.
Yeah, I think that's a good sign. So both of your books and with their short stories, I've read both of them and noticed some very similar themes happening in the books. And one that I think is one of the most intriguing to me is in your story heroes and your story, Things I Say to My Son, when he's your favorite, yeah. Is the mother-son relationship. And I actually want you to read from those stories. Yours is the whole story, the whole sentence, but to read from those stories, if you don't mind, I'm going to for you to start first.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about a little bit more about these relationships and what I've seen in them. But first, I want everyone else to hear them.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm reading from Heroes. Should I give a premise about what's?
You can, yeah, sure.
So it's based about a boy who's was killed, and we don't hear from him directly, but it's the aftermath of that with his family and his school, mostly his mother. When the season turned cooler, Selma rolled up her sleeves and went into Jamal's room. She opened the doors of his cupboard and, one by one, took out his shirts and shorts and pants and folded them. Sometimes her heart beat fast. Sometimes her hands trembled. She experimentally sniffed a shirt but did not feel anything. She packed his things into suitcases and gave them to her Masi, the woman who came to her house every morning to mop the floors and wash the dishes. The Masi had a moment of doubt before accepting such generous donation. Did she really want her own sons wearing the clothes of a dead boy? Her hesitation was only for a few seconds, though, and grabbing Selma's hands with her calloused ones, she called for God's wrath upon the heads of the killers. I gave away his clothes today, all of them, Selma told her husband that night. Asif's lips trembled and he wiped his eyes, and Selma felt powerful and stubborn and in control of herself. Asif said it was a heartless thing to do, but right away he apologized for saying that. But Selma was already feeling sad and mean. It was wrong of her not to have kept every last dirty sock. She began to fill the room with expletives. Asif pleaded with her to be quiet. Then he put on a song on his laptop and turned the volume up as high as it could go. He sat with his knees drawn up while the song played and his wife shouted. The next morning, Selma woke up and saw Asif looking at her tentatively, as if conducting a silent assessment of her emotional state. Selma's insides were always going to be a little bruised now, but she smiled at Asif to show that she had turned a corner. She told him that today she was going to complete cleaning of Jamal's room. She took off the sheets Son had last slept on, and then she started pulling the mattress off the bed. No room for him in a new house, she made herself think briskly, her teeth biting her tongue in painful fortitude. The mattress tumbled to the floor. Taped to the side that had rested on the slats was a small rectangular plastic packet. Selma peeled it off and looked inside it. Small round pills with hearts and smiley faces on them. She made a sound that was between a surprised oh and a calm ah. Clutching the bag, she walked swiftly to her room. Ecstasy, her browser search engine declared after she typed in a description. She didn't know what to make of this. She paced her room in anger, breathing hard, putting away clothes and straightening the bag in her fist. She thought, should they ground him or kick him out of the house? She had never seen him use the drugs. She wanted to say, it's those friends of his. But the tenses of her thoughts were confusing her. Nothing was easy to understand anymore. She went back to her son's room. She sat down on the mattress and wondered about other things, if her parents needed any money, if her students wanted to put up a play this year, until Asif came home and Jamal's glow-in-the-dark clock told her it was 8 o'clock. She put the plastic packet inside a zippered space in her handbag and ate dinner with the family. She tried to keep her voice free of clues as she talked to her husband. She glanced at her daughter Sophia and wondered if she had known. Had Jamal and Sophia been friendly, secret-sharing siblings? She tried to be shrewd about the past, tried to remember her children's behavior and expressions and statements, but nothing came to mind. They could not have been Jamal's, she thought in bed later. Her thoughts as she sank into sleep were the very cliches she urged her students to avoid.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.
Slightly different tone in this one.
That's the point.
All right, this is called Things I Say to My Son While He Sleeps. If you end up breaking your promise and climbing out the window into the alley and meeting those boys whose beards are nearing manhood and whose angry eyes pick at my body, I know they see a useless woman, a crumbling moral life, no man to protect me, and who slip you into the dark mouth of the old internet cafe down in Johartown, and who won't let you smoke, though I am grateful to them for this, with whom your eyes sharpen when you tell them you want to be pure, and when they pat your shoulders and say, you are doing Allah's work, brother, and who give you advice on how to bow when you pray, and hand you a gun and tell you your father is probably in hell, though listen, he was a good man, no matter what he did. It is not a sin to work at a bookstore when you have 4 mouths to feed. even when the books have things in them that are shameful. And you have to listen. He was not spreading immorality, son. He was keeping you alive. If they find you battles to fight, tell you all the things wrong with the doctor's family you've lived next door to your entire life, whose mother carried you when you were little, whose children you played with, who was the first to run to your father when he lay bleeding in the street. Remember, he steadied your hand over your father's chest, showed you how to keep the blood inside, but whose daughter steps out of her house without covering her head. And if little fires of shame burn inside you for knowing them, and because you see my head uncovered in the market too. And those boys tell you that the entire neighborhood is watching you share your wall with a gopher, that your father died not because of the bullet, but because he was sin, and because an unholy hand touched him at the end. And if they burn enough of your heart that it scatters like cinder, and if you find yourself bold in the moonlight, and your feet are steady on the brick along our street, and even before the chimney smoke has died down in our house, even before your brothers have gone to sleep, already you can feel yourself a man, the kind of man who wants to clean all the sin from his blood, who will be wrapped in coldness at the kitchen table in the morning, the kind of man who will always find purpose in erasure, who tells himself he will never bear the insult of a blasphemer's existence on Allah's earth. If those boys' words are the beat of your steps, if your hand is bold enough to ring the doorbell, knowing I am waiting for you just a few feet away, knowing your brothers are looking for you like you used to look for your father. And if you stand at that door waiting for it to open, and if your fingers are just a little numb around the gun, and if you shift your feet, and if you feel as if there are a million eyes on your back, but you feel alive, more alive than you have ever felt, forgetting that your existence is the pure there can be. Turn the gun to your own head, son, and shoot.
So what I love about how these two stories are in conversation is about how mothers are having to negotiate their sons' interior lives outside of being their babies, and also having to consider those sons' potential like deviance or even violence. So in Farah's story, the mother finds ecstasy well after he's dead, and so she's grappling with the fact that he's dead, and then she finds drugs. And she has to wonder, are these his drugs? And, she's having a hard time believing that they're his drugs, and yet she carries them around with her in secret.
Yeah.
Later, as she's trying to negotiate.
Yeah.
This. And similarly, the mother in this story is having to consider how much does she love her son if, inside of him things grow that violent or, to a degree that is suddenly in conflict with her
I guess moral values.
moral values. Yeah. So I was wondering if you guys would comment on that stuff about writing that, and do you have sons, and what is the thought of these mothers as characters negotiating this?
Well, I do have two boys, and one of them just turned 18. So very relevant ages. And actually the first time I read this out loud, he was in the room, which is a very interesting experience. It is, I think this is part of, not that I considered my own children when I was writing this, but I think part of motherhood is learning to negotiate the distance between who you are and who your children become. So much of who I've become is not who my parents were or wanted me to be. And I think it's the same with my children. Like I see them and they're really, yes, you can raise them and train them, but they are their own beings. And I think having to pull yourself or like putting your ego aside to say they are their own beings who can have, sometimes destructive thoughts, sometimes, and that it's not necessarily a transferred evil or like a transferred tendency. I think that's an interesting thing to think about, especially, so I wrote this in response, I was writing the one sentence thing And then I saw this news from Pakistan about some boys, young boys in, can't remember if it was Gujranwala or like one of these smaller towns, and they had lynched or attacked somebody. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, how do you as a mom look at that and feel okay? You cannot, I mean, no matter what your belief system is, to see your child take a life, that would be a difficult thing to do. And what advice might you, or what might you feel like, you know, watching your child have that capability? And my mind always does go to dark things. So
Yeah, well, the conflict of that.
yeah.
And then the mother in your story having to grapple with, was he, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this was one of the first stories I've written years ago. My coming to the story was in a way that I was interested in writing about a person that you discover more about after they're gone, and more devastating or picture changing things about them. And when I do have a son, but he's really small, he's only 11, barely. But when you do have kids, as they grow up, you have a fixed image. As much as you want to say that I'm very open-minded, or, you know, I'm flexible and whatnot, but you do have a certain image of how you want them to be, moral values wise. So I think this is what the mother, you know, had, and her son is not a young child. He's probably in his late teens in the book, in the story. So once he's dead, and then generally you grieve about a person, there's only the good things you remember. But then this was one big shocker that she discovered, and this whole secret life almost. And then she has all these, she's grappling with her grief, and she's grappling with coming to terms with what she thought he was like, but he was a different person. So,
And that affects her grieving.
Yeah, a lot.
It's almost like two, like she's lost like sort of a son,
Yeah.
but also lost another son that
The
she
sense
didn't
of
even,
who
he was.
Yeah. I think that's, I have two kids, and I remember one was sort of bullied one time, and that was hurtful. And then there was this one time my daughter was at dance. I was watching the dance screen, and she's tiny, and they're doing their little thing and their tutus. And all of a sudden she turns to this little girl, and, you know, I'm not in the room with them, and shoves her. And I was like, oh, and the mom was next to me. I was like, oh, and then she did it again. And I was like, where's the teacher? You know, like, and I found it more devastating and more painful to see my child be a bully instead of being bullied. And not that the character.
It's a different pain seeing them.
capable of things.
Capable of things that you
would rather they
Yeah.
not. Like, even if you're capable of those things, and I say this to my boys all the time, like, I know what I'm capable of. I just don't want you to do the same things that I would do, which I think is probably many parents have said. Right?
Yeah.
Do what I say, not what I do. But yeah.
Okay, so along the same lines of parents and the books, you also have some stories that show fathers in the books, though not a lot. It's mother heavy, I think. But interestingly, in a couple of your stories, both in the father heavy influenced stories, it's funny with those stories, the fathers tend to set off exposing a dynamic between siblings in a way that's not happening in mother's stories. So I was wondering if you'd be willing to read a little bit of that as well for me. Hananah, start with you. It's
Sure.
Listening for Storms.
All right. I gotta think about that part about like the sibling thing, because I hadn't thought about it, but I think I see what you mean. Okay, this one's called Listening for Storms. There's a tornado coming to Pennsylvania. I think they said Wednesday on TV, or could have been when is the day. I couldn't exactly tell because I was in the kitchen making a buzz dinner, and his oxygen machine, 8 years old, huffed and puffed and made such a racket. You would have thought it was a thing with cancer in it and not the man. Now that he's gone, I'm laying claim to his red 66 Mustang and getting out of here before the storm hits. I have never been much into cars, but Sarah called after the funeral this morning and said she wanted to take a look at Abba's things and that the car was hers. Abba had said so. I couldn't think of any good reason why she should have it, given that she couldn't even bother coming to say goodbye to our father, or for the 8 years before this. It seemed like she and her New York suits just didn't want to be seen around Erie. She no longer had the right. So I said that, to which she said, "Why are you so hateful?" And to which I said, "Are you jealous Lubba loved me better?" The older sister in her was prickling, I could tell, so I told her the car wasn't worth much anymore anyway. The guys who had come to fix up the house before I put it on the market had spilled paint on it. She got so mad I could tell the vein in the middle of her forehead was popping out, a spitting image of Abba's temper. "How could you let it happen? You were in charge." She was right about that. The day before he passed, I took his money from the bank. Then in the midst of him throwing a bowl of soup against the wall, telling me he didn't like seeing my face, just like he didn't like seeing my mother's, I dragged everything from the house onto the driveway, called a truck to pick up the lot, hung my favorite air freshener around the car's rearview mirror, folded maps in the glove compartment. I scrubbed the house clean top to bottom, scoured the old walls where his machine was plugged in until my knuckles were raw and the water dripped well and good into the socket. Even the man who came to pick up the hospital bed, the broken machine, was impressed at how organized I was, smiled at me from behind his mustache and complimented me on how well I had kept my dad's medical records, recorded every meal and everything. He looked down my shirt and said any man would be lucky to have me around. I could have settled for him, maybe. Could have seen myself in a life if he hadn't asked me about my sister, and didn't she and him go to high school together? And had I really lived in this house all my life? It's a big world out there, he said. Now the trunk sat open, waiting for me to load my suitcase. I had to go, so I told Sarah I was very sad, and I had been for years. And now that everything was sold off and I no longer had a home, I needed time to myself. I needed to find a purpose. So of course she said she was coming. This is what sisters were for. And wait, hold on. Had I put the house on the market when Abba was still alive? And I was silent, and she was too. And I knew she was chewing on her nails, turning thoughts over in her head. She said slowly again, "When did you put the house up for sale, Mona?" And then when she put my name out there like that, I knew she was starting to understand. So sad I don't remember, but I had to go. And she told me I'd better not go anywhere. We had to talk about this. And I said, "Sure, I'll wait for you at the house," and dragged my suitcase from the living room to the garage. "I mean it," she said. And I said, okay, because it was. Everything was finally okay. The sickness was gone and the caretaker job out west was mine. And the only thing left between her and me was a few years spent lying together in the same room at night, listening to my mother crying when my father's cancer was discovered, and the silence after she left. There was no way to tell her, but that by the time she finds me, I will have scraped paint from the car, grime from the walls, and taken off to outrun a tornado somewhere else.
Would you mind reading from your story present tense?
Yeah. That was cool, by the way.
Thank you. I like killing people.
And so politely. So I heard a little bit. So this is about, because I'm reading from the middle of it, sort of. It's two brothers, mainly from the point of view of the younger brother who goes back to visit his parents, but there's flashbacks happening in parallel with present tense. Literally, it's called present tense. Mm-hmm. My brother blamed our mother. He watched her through narrowed eyes. "She knows where he is. She's lying to us," he said to me at least twice a day. If we were in the school van and I was laughing at something a friend said, he would pinch me and hiss those words into my ear. I would immediately turn away from the joke and remove the grin from my face. "Do you miss him, our father?" he would ask me in a tight voice. I would lie and say, "Yes, of course I do." Secretly, I would relish the feel of slackness in my limbs and my insides, the ability of my lungs to balloon out to full capacity. We had grown up on thin air, the oxygen sucked up by our father and mother's moods. We were curved and wiry and tense like antennae, picking up signals of impending storms from the way our father snapped his newspaper or how our mother shut the fridge door. Too sharp a sound meant that, soon, old wounds were going to be reopened with blade-like words. Sometimes I mouthed along, being my father and mother by turns, like an actor playing two roles. Other times, I went to my brother and found him elaborately coloring in a map, or a picture of the human heart, or an eyeball, or the circulation system. He wanted me to have a good opinion of our father. He said that a long time ago, before we were born, our father had gone without a lot of things so he could save money for his future children. He had eaten only one solid meal a day, did not have chicken more than once a month, and walked to most places under the blazing sun. Then, when he had enough money, he got this whole house built just for us. He put 3 bedrooms in it, each a different color, yellow, green, and blue. The boundary wall surrounding the house was also an example of how much he cared. It had shards of glass set on the top to stop burglars from climbing over and robbing him of his possessions. From the other room, we heard a roar. My brother said, "You can see why he's like that, right? It's because of her. He can't help it."
And then there's another
Yeah,
part.
there's
If you
another
would like, if you read that part. More rivalry.
While my father was gone, my mother became beautiful. She grew thin and her skin became so pale it was almost transparent. When she stood under a strong light, I could see little blue veins. She wore perfume and she held our books daintily so as not to ruin her polished fingernails. After my brother poured her bottle of nail color down the sink, she kept her nails bare again. One evening, he slapped down a newspaper in front of her and told her to check it for her father's name among victims of recent incidents. And she did run her fingertip down the lists and articles detailing riots and mobs. But I felt she wasn't really reading. She was thinking about getting her hair done at the salon. If she thought about her father or missed him, she didn't say so. She didn't mention him at all. In the morning, she waited with us for the school van and told us we were not to step outside until the last bell rang and that we were to come straight home. She shook her head and wished we didn't have to go so far away. Trouble could start anywhere in the city at any time. She moved toward my brother, but he stepped away from her reach. She busied herself with straightening my tie. She put her hands on my shoulders and said, "People are disappearing." I was elated by her concern and did well in all my tests. In the mirror, I practiced smiles of gratitude I could give her. When she sat at the table with us, she leaned over, her back a soft letter C, and the pliancy made me unable to speak sometimes. When her father had been around, she would come out of the table with a big knife in her hand and slam it on the table. Then she would flip through our schoolwork, and if one of us got a sum wrong or had written untidily, she would throw the book at the wall or run a sharpened pencil down the page. Under the table, I would pick the skin around my nails into tiny pieces, eyeing the blade, because I was sure that one day my mother would run it through us, all of us.
Reminds me a little bit of, have you read We the Animals?
No.
Justin Torres. It's like these boys admiring their mom.
Oh.
Very, yeah.
Well, I love the dynamics of different siblings to different parents, or like here, you also bring up, the burden of caretaking of a parent and another child not having that responsibility, and how siblings have different roles with different parents.
Yeah.
Tell me about y'all's sibling rivalry. Do you have any siblings?
I do have a younger brother. He is a younger brother. I'm the older sister. There is no rivalry because that's how it goes. Yeah, we were very close. So we didn't really have much of a rivalry, especially not growing up.
Did you feel like you had different relationships to parents though?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a younger brother, and there's no rivalry.
There's no rivalry.
I think it was just 2 of us. So
Yeah.
maybe that cuts out the rivalry factor, but definitely there's a difference in how, relationship with the parents were. So,
Well, it's a great tool for the fiction because it's all there. It's the family unit already exists. And so you're mining potential conflict inside that unit. And I think all readers can relate to that in one way or another. So yeah,
when I was writing the story, I was thinking more about how, in a family unit, because families fascinate me, but also in Karachi, every now and then there's disappearances. When there was a time when they were happening, and what would a child perceive that to be? A young child, he would assume that maybe his father has joined a cause or something, and which we didn't find out if he had. But how did the two brothers perceive their father's absence? It's a sudden disappearance.
Yeah, and one of their need to believe it's
Yeah, what are they
noble.
attributed to? Is he a hero? Is he not a hero? Why did he go away? So
Oh, it's just like with heroes. And so I know everyone hasn't necessarily read both of those full stories, but with the first story that she read from, and it's the same, it's grappling with who that person
a
is.
disappearance.
Yes, a disappearance. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think of it like that.
Yeah.
But you meant it.
Yeah.
And then what do you think about your story then with the sisters? Like, did you just see something that you hadn't seen before?
In terms of sibling relationships,
Or just your intent when you were writing with the siblings?
I did not mean for them to be so at each other's throats. When I initially started writing it, to be honest, like this was in response to a prompt, and I had to put a red car in it, and then some other things which then got written out eventually, but the car really sort of caught my imagination. And then sort of this idea of, I used to really be into cars at a certain point, and sort of then it just kind of developed into this idea of, it was a very different story. It was a tornado and car story. And then I think as I started writing, this was one of the ones where it was difficult. This is not my least favorite story, by the way, so I'm not giving anything away. But this was one of the ones where I couldn't quite relate to the characters too much. So I had to write it from many different angles, like the sisters. And first it was a dad story, and the dad, giving away his like things before he died. And as I said, I do like to sort of, well, in this book anyway, there's a lot of death. That's part of the idea of love and, the power struggles. And so then it slowly kind of developed into the sibling rivalry thing, which I haven't really written about too much. It was interesting that it went there. And that there's tension, but I'll tell you, it still makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable reading this, because if it's a bit more than I've seen, I guess.
So I do think it interesting, because you both had the sister brothers, and you said you didn't have a lot of
personal rivalry.
Right, but you have two sisters and you have two brothers, so maybe there's something about that same-sex sibling nature that lends itself to the maybe, clash.
Yeah, that's
maybe. I mean, I don't know, because I don't have sisters, and sort of most of my cousins around my age are all boys. But I felt like people I knew who had sisters growing up tend to say that there's a bit more. There's also deep sisterhood, but you have sisters. Yeah. But I feel like there's I've seen there tends to be a bit more tension in a way that maybe, brothers and sisters maybe don't have.
Like when they're different genders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when they're opposite, then they're more of a caretaker situation.
Especially older sister, especially in my house, I felt like I was sort of managing, helping him like sort of through life. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I do think that same gender siblings will.
I think it works in fiction nonetheless, even if we are not cracking it in real life.
Yeah.
It makes sense that to have the same gender. Okay, I want to do something that's fun, that's shared between their writing, that I could not help but notice, and it has nothing to do with families. I mean, not too often, but their characters, they both have a character or two who want to lick things that have nothing to do with food. Nothing. It's one thing to have, stories where they're eating and tasting and there's food. I'm dying to know why.
Why? Why do people lick things?
Well, I'm going to tell everybody. She has a story at the end of it. It's called Beautiful, and at first I was thinking she licked the rail, but she licks dust off her fingers from the rail, right?
Yeah.
it doesn't taste like it. And this is not food.
I repeat, it's not food.
It's not food. And that character licks her fingers. Her characters, which I've seen many, many, many stories from her that are not even necessarily in the book. So sometimes I get a little confused because I think there's more licking going on. But in this book, I noticed there's two stories.
Yeah.
Can I just
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
all right. One she sees this guy who's come into the post office. She works the post office and she says, he doesn't seem like the kind of man who would give up. I think I might like to lick the insides of his knee.
Not context, that sounds really fun.
Yes, you better get it and read the whole thing so you understand the context. And then in another one, there's a tree outside that her husband and he's wanting to cut it down. The tree's important to her. She doesn't want him to cut it down. He chews some rice, which falls off of his tongue. He says, too much salt, he said, and wiped the taste off the back of his hand. The grain fell. In the tree, I asked, thinking of running my tongue across the ragged willow bark, tasting the wood, sucking on a red, swollen catkin. So,
What's with all
what's going on? What's with all the licking?
That's funny. I was just saying that I was at this conference where somebody had read the thing and said, why are your characters licking everything? I think for me, a lot of what I'm writing is women being a bit rebellious and women sort of taking power away from men and into their own hands. And, sort of tied, like with the willow tree story, there's a little bit of sensuality between the tree and the woman. So I think it's playing with that line of defiance and sexuality and sensuality and in ways that is unexpected and not an FU, but kind of on my terms, I
think that makes sense, actually, with your character too.
Well, I wasn't thinking of her as somebody who's a defiant by purpose character. I think she's very much a loner.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, she's in the orphanage before she makes her big move. And but all throughout her life there, she was not in a group of girls. She was separate from them, and she would have her own little secret escapades within the orphanage, finding other people's clothing and wearing it without asking and stuff like that. And truly, when I first read your email about the licking, I was like, what? She does do that indeed. And I thought maybe she doesn't want it minerals. Because when you go for unusual food, it's a sign of lacking something. So maybe on some tiny level it is that, but I think she's just slightly odd. It was all that was, I was just thinking about how, though she does that at the end of the story when her life has taken her to a good place.
Yeah, it's the very end.
It's the very end, and you would think things are sorted and all the parts of your brain should be functioning quote unquote normally. So maybe it's that as well, the definition of normal.
It's
to what extent do you think somebody is sorted and become normalized? What elements in your life do you have to have before you can say, okay, I'm completely mainstream now. Got a husband, check, house, check, kids go to a good school, check, and then she's still licking the dust off the
which I love, by the way.
Right?
Because to me, it's that same impulse of like, this is me. Like, I'm going to keep me for me, and I'm doing all these other things for everything else. And because even in this willow tree story, she's participating in everything society asks her to do, but really, this is like her private little me thing, which is interesting that licking is the thing that we both settled on. That is,
talk at length about that though.
Well, I think it sounds like an effective tool for rebellion, for telling something about a character that without telling, because I was thinking about it first about sense. Alice McDermott, we were in a workshop together one time. Alice McDermott once said something about the sense. Oh, no, that was a craft lecture, I think. She said something about the sense of smell being really effective in fiction and how it can be used in prose and effective in prose and accessible in prose in a way that is not available in movies or on television, because you can see the pie, you can see whatever, but you can't actually smell it. But when you read fiction in particular, you are in the consciousness of someone and it's evoking the sense better. And it's like the only medium, essentially, she says, that can do that. Songs aren't going to do that.
But I feel like, so for me, I think I use taste a lot. And I don't know if it's because it ties into me. Like in my mind, it ties into some sort of like physical presence in the world. But I'm just as a person, I think I'm also very sense focused, like smell and taste is very important. So I think for me, part of these characters, like actually experiencing the world is not just visual or mental. They have to kind of get their hands on it and kind of, proverbially taste their world, but then sometimes also actually.
Yeah, I was just randomly thinking about, just struck me that sometimes the people in my story, sometimes they have like a little escape door in their heads, like maybe licking or that's the one time though.
There's no line.
Or something that they're keeping to themselves, like the mother who doesn't tell about what she discovered, she keeps it to herself. Something which they, as they're normalizing themselves, they're keeping a little part super secret, whether it's a habit or a piece of info, anything.
I think also just as human beings, we all have the person that's here and the person you're in the mirror sometimes.
Yeah.
Or like how you used to dance. Like now TikTok is making everybody's personal bedroom stuff like out there. But like I remember when I was 12 and 13 and just like in the mirror, like doing all these things, like making faces and whatever. Those are things you don't necessarily share with the world, but I feel like we all have sort of like these little odd, quirky, weird thoughts and feelings and inclinations. And, that's kind of part of being a full person. So with my characters, like I think when I present them, I don't want to just present their public. It's sort of, there's a lot of sort of private stuff that we get to look in on, and sometimes it's super weird.
Yeah.
Well, does anyone have any questions before we start to wrap up our evening? Anybody want to ask any? Nothing about licking? Okay, well, thank you so much. We'll give them a round of applause. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
For our viewers at home, can you let us know where we can keep up with your work and find out the next big project of yours, or where you might be speaking next as well?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter, although I'm trying to de-Twitter myself these days, but it's at Hananah Zaheer or hananahzaheer.com. I'm afraid I can't remember where I'm speaking next, but it's on the website.
I'm also not on Twitter, and I can't remember my handle.
Farah 06.
Yeah, thank you. It's at Farah 06. Yeah, that's how bad I am at that. And I'm going to the Ampersand Festival in Williamsburg, Virginia, today after tomorrow. So that's for next.
Thank you to Lost City Books, Shady.
Absolutely.
as
Thank you
always.
all. Thank you both for coming, all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
If you don't have your copy of the book yet, I'm going to bring some copies up if you would like to get yours signed.
Oh yeah, I'll have one now.
And